Hello there and welcome to this edition of the ADIPEC Energy Dialogues, a series of conversations with leading energy experts from around the world brought to you in the run-up to ADIPEC Virtual 2020. I'm Etna Trainer, your host for this show. Now we're looking at the energy sector, of course, from all angles and looking at it at a very interesting time in history, I think, as it will prove to be. And today I'm absolutely delighted to have with us the Chairman and CEO of Baker Hughes. Lorenzo Simonelli joins us. Lorenzo, thank you so much for taking the time.
And it's a pleasure and nice to see you, and looking forward to our discussion.
And again, it'll be great that we can catch up, hopefully, in the not too distant future in person. But for now, it's great to have you online here and, addressing our audience and really looking at the energy sector, of course, from your perspective and what has been going on. And when we look back on this year, I think we'll all look at the start of a new century that we all had maybe different hopes and dreams for, but it has been challenging without a doubt. I don't need to remind you of that. And for the energy industry as well. But sometimes I think at times like this, it's where the energy industry comes together and shows its resilience in many ways. How have things been at Baker Hughes?
Well, I think first of all of us look at 2020 as being playing out differently than we expected at the outset. And I think coming into the year, I never would have anticipated the pandemic having the impact it had, and then also the price war that took place in March, and also the devastation from a demand perspective. But I think you have to take a step back globally. Obviously, COVID-19 and the pandemic has been a challenge for all of us, and all industries have had to cope with it. I'm very proud of what we've been able to do as an energy industry, and also here at Baker Hughes, and excited about the prospects of going forward. So you look at 2020, we've learned a lot of things. First of all, it's always been a priority to maintain the health, safety of our employees, and that's been paramount. And we've been able to manage through this pandemic, retaining operations open, and also continuing to provide services to our customers, and also providing energy to the world. And let's remember, we are a strategically significant industry, and so throughout this, we've been able to stay open. And I couldn't be prouder of the team in being able to do that, and also with our suppliers, our partners around the world. Also, I think we've learned to be agile. Today, we're doing this virtually. And in many cases, we would have seen each other in locations around the world, but now we've learned how to work virtually. Remote operations has picked up, but also just the way in which teams around the world are collaborating differently. And also technology being adapted in really the quest towards helping everybody. I look at what we've done from a community standpoint with additive manufacturing, being able to help with providing health products, masks, and different items that have been required to make sure that we stay safe during this pandemic. So clearly the year has played out differently than we anticipated, but I think it's shown the resilience of our industry yet again, and also the fortitude of the Baker Hughes employee base around the world. So very pleased, and still looking forward to the pandemic being over, a vaccine coming soon, and then being able to get back out there and travel to see all the employees to say thank you personally.
Indeed, it is. It's a very dynamic time. And, here we are in September 2020. And also it's when we look at it, it's the diamond anniversary of OPEC. So when we also look at, what's been happening over the year and the changes that have happened in this industry, and indeed, for companies like yourselves, once the oil services company, things have changed so much, and it's everybody, and even OPEC, looking 60 years later at a much more wider, almost holistic energy industry. How important is it that in a way everybody comes together and maybe takes that mind shift at this point in time?
I think it's very important. And I think it's important that we come together as an industry really to help manage the energy transition. And it's clear that there is a wave of change that has been bubbling up. If you look at sustainability, you look at the requirements for reducing the carbon footprint. At the same time, we know the world needs energy, and the world needs more from energy, and that's what we've got to provide. So oil and gas has a natural role to play, but we've also got to take on the tough discussions of how do we start to decarbonize, how do we start to reduce the carbon footprint, how do we make sure emissions, methane, all are reduced, and really work on a narrative where the world understands the benefits that we provide. Because global expansion, economic expansion, the developing nations, they won't get to where they need to be without the energy industry, and we have to play that role, but also play it in the right way through the energy transition.
And just as you talk to the narrative, how it has changed indeed, and I'm sure you're all very encouraged about how it's changed, talk to me about the UN's Global Compact Initiative and indeed Baker Hughes's role within that.
Well, we thought it was very important to actually be part of the UN and actually sign up for what we believe in, both from not just a sustainability perspective, but also from a humanitarian perspective. And, you know, we play a role in making this world a better place. And if you see also from our sustainability report that we just issued, you know, we're AAA rated by the MSCI, which is a governing agency, and we're very proud of that. I think, again, we have to acknowledge what the world is going through and participate in it. At Baker Hughes, we look at ourselves as being an energy technology company. We enable the transition that's taking place, and we assist our major customers, both the IOCs, the NOCs, but also across the energy landscape with tools, technology, services, and equipment that will help make energy cleaner and also more sustainable and more reliable as we go forward. So the UN acts as really a foundation for that, and we're pleased to be part of it, and we think it's an important message.
And indeed, I mean, with the energy companies and people like yourself being part of that global dialogue, because, you know, energy really for every other industry is the foundation in many ways. But you talk about operating throughout, you know, the energy value chain. So not just in terms of upstream, but midstream, downstream. How has that changed in terms of your operation?
Well, as I look at the future, clearly you've seen a reduction in some of the upstream investments, and that's been natural with the economic environment we're in, also the demand slowing down. But where we play a role is making sure that there's the sustainability of energy and also that we can reduce the carbon footprint of the energy that's produced. So our role is really on a scale of upstream, midstream, downstream to help provide, move, and also decrease the carbon content. I look at our role within natural gas and also LNG. Again, LNG is very necessary for the world as we go through the next decade. It is also, natural gas is the cleanest of the fossil fuels. And I think it's important that we continue to remember that as we look at new energy mixes as well. The other aspect I'd say is, you know, we've seen much more technology from a digital perspective, the opportunity to drive efficiencies, bring down non-productive time, increase optimization, and that's going to be critical as well. So how do we get more from less is really an aspect of also driving the industry forward, and that's the role we play. So we do look at ourselves as being much more than just an oil field services company. In fact, with the breadth of the portfolio we have, we think that we can actually help really across the energy value chain bring down the carbon footprint as well as increase the value of the energy that's produced.
And even, you know, in those short years since you've been, you know, leading the company as well, so much has happened. I think this has been really a huge dynamic shift. And there you are, positioned at the forefront of us. Just bring us up to date in a way, the sort of speed at how things have happened in the last few years.
You know, I think actually we saw this happening, but the speed has intensified because of the pandemic. And I think actually the realization of people seeing what happens when you reduce CO2, what happens when you reduce emissions, was evident from an environmental perspective. You know, you've had sayings of being able to see Everest from Kathmandu, you've had dolphins in the Bay of Venice, and I think there's just a realization that as a total humanitarian aspect, we've got to work together to see the benefits of reducing carbon emissions and also methane. Now you get into how you make it happen. And that's what's really accelerating, is the way in which we can play a role. And so our strategy has been very clear from the outset. I'd say that this event in 2020 is driving us to really rethink and accelerate our strategy. So, you know, we're transforming the core, which means focusing on areas that make sense from a margin perspective and also from a customer technology perspective. We're investing in new areas with new equipment and services that reduce the carbon footprint. We've got the best performing gas turbines from an emissions perspective, compressors. We've also got digital solutions that are able to be deployed, such as remote operations, and going into areas like non-metallic and chemicals that, again, have a lower carbon footprint. And last but not least, the new frontiers. You know, you're hearing a lot about hydrogen, energy storage, CCUS, and these are areas that, you know, are some time away, but really you've got to invest in the technology and the capability now. And I look at it very much like natural gas and LNG. It started 30 years ago, and look where it is today. That will be the same, even at an accelerated pace, when you think of hydrogen, energy storage, and CCUS going forward. So we're looking at really the spectrum there.
No, and it's a very dynamic and exciting time in the industry because of that. And I want to talk to you a little bit about hydrogen in a minute, but come back to gas, natural gas, and LNG. And, you know, we've heard about the golden age of gas. We've heard about it as a transition fuel, as a destination fuel, you know, the role of gas. But the one key thing I think we're all beginning to realize is it's certainly here to stay at the moment, and it's necessary. And again, when you look at the energy transition and in terms of the role that natural clean gas can play, where do you see it positioned?
So I think even though people are critical of it, and clearly it's still got a CO2 footprint, it is the cleanest of the fossil fuels, and we've got to do a better job of communicating that, and also work towards net zero LNG. And I think that is doable, and there are technologies that when you combine natural gas, LNG with carbon capture and the sequestration, you can move towards actually a net zero LNG. And I still am very much positive on the role of natural gas, and both as a transition but destination. You look at what's happening in China, India, you look at across the globe where there's a big increase in demands for energy, that's where natural gas will play a role. And also, as you continue to come off coal and also some of the higher content fuels, diesel, some of the movement away from oil, natural gas plays a key role in that. So we're still very much looking at the next decade as being a decade where gas plays a critical role.
Now, net zero, I think, is a phrase that we're hearing right across the industry. And again, that's when I talk about the narrative shifting. We weren't hearing that many, many years ago. And, you know, you set your own targets for the company, but you must also be encouraged that, you know, some of your peers and some of the IOCs and, you know, many people, many industries in the sector are really coming on board and looking at this seriously and coming up with very, very solid plans and practical plans. So how are you going to actually get there?
So as you may recall, in 2019, at the beginning of the year, we made our own commitment. And we said that by 2030, we would reduce our emissions by 50%, and we were targeting to be net zero by 2050. A number of other companies have also followed suit and made their own commitments after that. And it was for us a big statement, and also went into some of the United Nations elements of why we joined. And it is very much feasible to get there. If I look at what we've done since 2012 baseline, we've reduced our own emissions by 31% approximately. And that's by taking natural steps of reusing any gas that's being utilized in our gas turbine operations, being able to transition from fuels into electric, being able to do the conversions in our office locations of lighting. And so across the board, there are solutions, and also detection of the emissions, and then also making sure the emissions are actually maintained internal is very critical. And so capturing those. So we're confident on the 2030, 50%, and the technology will be the guide to get us to net zero. And that's why, you know, that energy technology company element of it is so important, and why we keep technology in there is because clearly as we go forward, there's going to be new events that take place. But we're happy with where we are at the moment and making good progress as we go through our quest to at least 2030, 50% reduction.
And indeed, you know, many might think very ambitious goals, and they would have sounded even more ambitious. But I think the way companies like yourself have laid it out, and again, small steps, bigger steps, investing in the technology, all of that, that's going to make it happen. I think that commitment, and again, you know, I think kudos to leaders like yourself who take this on board and very publicly, I think, almost put a personal stake in it. You know, so I think this is so important for the industry, and indeed, as you said, for getting that message across. Talk to me a little bit about investments that Baker Hughes is looking at and how that will fit in with the next step? And I know you've mentioned chemicals and hydrogen, but when we look at, the investments that are on hand at the minute, what are you looking at that's looking interesting, exciting, and hopefully profitable investments for you?
Yeah, if you look at it really from a invest in growth, we're looking at the continued application of our industrial gas turbines. And if you look at what's happening around the world, energy is becoming more distributed. It's becoming more necessary in different locations. And so industrial gas turbines, we think, are very important with the role that gas can play, but then also having the efficiency and also the low emissions of industrial gas turbines below 20 megawatts. So a nice investment there, and also a line of new products that we've introduced that go beyond just what is typical customer base of your IOCs and NOCs, but go into really the industrial space and managing their energy landscape as well. So you look at companies in pulp and paper, you look at companies that are in pharmaceutical, they need also energy as well, and efficient energy with low emissions. So that's one area. Also, as you look at non-metallics, we announced a joint venture with Saudi Aramco relative to non-metallics. We think there's a huge application of really composites and being able to move from carbon intensive metal to really composites and non-metallic. Much lighter, much more durable, much more versatile in its applications. That's not just within the oil and gas industry, it's across multiple industries. If you think of tubulars, you think of pipelines, again, there is an opportunity there to really expand and move into areas to help manage the carbon footprint by moving towards composites. And chemicals plays a role as well, not just in the upstream where you're going to need more from existing wells, and so to help with enhanced oil recovery, but then also chemicals can help from an additive perspective to reduce the carbon footprint as well of other products that are made in the petrochemical industry. And there's a role, if you think of petrochemicals, that will be here for a long time. And we've got to continue to reduce the carbon footprint and drive the efficiency. And chemicals plays a role there in being able to do that. So we're working closely with the petrochemicals and also other additive players to enable that. And then as you go forward, the new frontiers, hydrogen, CCUS, and energy storage that are still early, but I think gaining momentum. And we're fortunate that we've got a large presence of already compressors that work in hydrogen applications. We've got experience of CCUS with also Gorgon in Australia. So it's a field we know, but it's clearly expanding and going to be different.
And talk to me a little bit, particularly about the hydrogen too, and that hydrogen turbine, the hybrid design too, and that of course Baker Hughes and SNAM completed the testing on that. But that sounds very, very interesting. And as a lot of people look at hydrogen, and it's becoming not quite mainstream, but the conversation is there. There's more interest in it. It's, on policymakers' agenda, and it's certainly looking as part of the fuel mix for the future.
Yes, and it's actually gained pace very quickly. And I think at the end, people have realized that hydrogen is very abundant and it can be utilized within the transportation sector to begin with, and then also on a power generation afterwards. As you mentioned, we've got a hybrid turbine that we tested with SNAM, and SNAM being one of the largest pipeline network operators across Europe, is now looking to be able to have a blend of hydrogen and natural gas. And so having a turbine that can be utilized in that application, critical for them. And then we also have, from a power generation side, our Nova LT that can run 100% on hydrogen. Hydrogen is a solution there to meet the 2025 emission requirements within Europe. And you're seeing a lot more about hydrogen plants being created. The plans in Saudi Arabia for a plant to be produced on hydrogen to be able to then distribute for transport. And again, large trucks, buses, and eventually it will go into power generation as well.
And of course, I think the discussion has moved, to a higher level, and the interest is there. And when we're looking at investors, it's slowly coming, but it looks like it's certainly going to be part and parcel of the mix. And I think it's so exciting to see companies like yourself making that investment, getting involved. Come back to gas indeed for a minute, and we look at you know, a lot of interest still in gas, you know, the whole LNG market. We look at maybe, you know, a possibility of oversupply in the market. I mean, you know, we're looking at the pricing. We've seen a bit of activity on Henry Hub, but the pricing needs to be stronger really for a lot of people here. But it's still a volatile market, but yet do you believe there's strength in it and a great future for the gas market?
We do, and I do personally, and I think, again, it's always been a lumpy business. I think, you know, we go through cycles, we've been through cycles before, but you look at the infrastructure that's there, you look at what's been invested, you look at the project opportunities. Again, we still believe that by 2030, there's a demand for 650 million tons of LNG. You know, today we've got just over 400 of installed capacity or coming online with new projects that will have to be FID'd in the next few years. We'll get there. And I think people forget sometimes it takes 5 years from the project beginning to actually the first cargoes being available. So, you know, over the course of the next few years, we'll continue to see investments in gas. And we think that, especially for the developing world, gas and LNG has a big role to play.
Now, over the past few years, you know, you've been the flag bearer, so to speak, of digitalization in the industry. And, you know, even at times when not everybody was convinced perhaps and committed, you know, you talk about the pace of change. And I think really probably the last few months, you know, is really bringing everybody on board. Do you see, you know, adopting, you know, digitalization, artificial intelligence, all of that as it's almost like we're on the highway and there's no turning back at this point for the industry to make sure that we get to the next level?
I think definitely the train has left the station, and now we're firmly on a path to finally implement it, utilize it, and also make sense of it. Because I think the term digitization can sometimes be misunderstood or try and capture too much. We've been fortunate that we played a role, and during the pandemic, I think you've seen the benefits of it. And I look at it, first of all, our ability to execute our operations remotely. That means being able to drill a well from a remote location, being able to introduce the capability of demanning has been huge. But then also, you look at it from a practical standpoint of being able to complete a string test where normally you would have multiple people in the same location being done virtually. So you've got different centers around the world looking at the actual string test being completed from the comfort of their own home in some cases. And that is something that previously customers wouldn't have said we can do. But during this period, it's become very common. And I think we won't go back to the old way of doing things. If anything, we'll get even more comfortable. The other element is artificial intelligence. As you know, we work with C3.ai, and now it's the benefit of how do you drive further productivity and efficiencies from the data that's been collected. And instead of being time series based, you start to really go to an aspect of algorithmic artificial intelligence with prevention, with optimization, enhanced reliability. And I think that's still an area that we've got to continue exploring. But definitely the train has left the station, and we've now already got 2 offerings that are out there, one on reliability, one on production with C3. We're looking to deploy more, and not just externally, but then also internally to improve our own efficiencies. And that's the other benefit of, you know, when you think about digital, it's being able to apply it internally within our own operations to become more efficient for the customers.
And I think when we look at the state of the industry and we look at the changes in the industry, it's also going to demand a very different and agile and creative in many ways workforce. Are you convinced and happy? And, you know, what are you doing within that sort of education side, obviously with your own people, but, you know, when you look at the wider industry, is enough been done? And are we getting the right people? Are the universities turning out the right people? And again, what can the industry do perhaps to actually encourage this?
So the universities clearly are doing the right thing, and they have the individuals being trained. We as an industry need to do a better job of attracting them. And that comes to the narrative also of, you know, the importance of energy, and that oil and gas is here to stay, and also is the bridge towards also some of the new energy mix. And we've got to do a better job on the narrative there, but we need more software developers, we need more engineers, and, you know, that multi-skilling of individuals. So we're very active with universities. I think we've got to continue to make the industry attractive for them to join. And, you know, these boom or bust cycles don't help anybody. And I think if there's one thing we need to consider is how do we avoid this big churn in our employment levels over the course of the next decade that you've seen in the past just because of cyclicality. And I think by deploying digital applications, by becoming more efficient, we can also become more stable. And fortunately at Baker Hughes also, we've got you know, a broader portfolio and also play along the total energy value chain, which means we're not as exposed as maybe some others just on the upstream side of oilfield services.
When you look at the wider energy industry and you look at you know, the producers, the consumers, what do you think the industry needs to be doing? Is it really about embracing technology? Is there a need for perhaps a new mindset as we, you know, embark on a new decade in many ways? And it seems like it's the time has come, and in many ways, you know, the sort of the hazards in one way, but maybe the benefit, if there can be a benefit of, you know, the last few challenging months, is that maybe the industry has taken a step back and really looked at where to go. And I think we're hearing, as we talked about, a different narrative, and they're looking towards, you know, a different future perhaps for the industry.
I'd say that the pandemic has caused us to pause and rethink and coalesce together and understand where we need to go as an industry. And I think you've seen it through actions that some of the IOCs have taken, some of the NOC announcements. Also, as you look at the players from a supply perspective, everybody's converging on the aspect of it's time for us to actually have a common message. It's time for us to show the benefits of what we can do. And I feel very positive about the future of the energy landscape. And I think actually, as we go forward, you'll see much more collaboration between the different stakeholders, and it's necessary. We can't hide ourselves away. We've got to be at the forefront and having the tough discussions, but then also making sure everybody remembers what's sensible. I mean, again, we've got to be partnering with governments. We've got to be working with them on the policies that will drive the new frontiers, as well as make sure that people have energy today and continue the economic growth.
And indeed being part of that discussion going forward too. When we look at the year ahead and you look at your plans and your business plans, and now that you've time to, maybe a little bit more time to reflect, although I know there's a lot of pressure on you in terms of your time and availability, even though you mightn't be traveling around the world, you're virtually there. But talk to me in terms of what we can expect perhaps from Baker Hughes in the year ahead, just before we go.
Yeah, no, Baker Hughes has, you know, stated its strategy as an energy technology company. We feel good about the progression that we're making. You know, we mentioned the outlook on our second quarter earnings, and we're very much in line with the outlook that we called for. As you start to see the economy improve, you know, you'll start to see demand pick up, and the energy transition is well underway. So our role in making sure that we continue to transform our core, that we really invest for growth, but we'd also look at the new frontiers is going to be key. And, you know, we are working collaboratively across the ecosystem, and we want to be at the forefront. So feel very good and very proud of the employee base and what they've been able to do and be agile during this pandemic, and also collectively make sure that we keep everybody safe.
Indeed, it is that resilience, that agility, and again, I think that commitment, as you say, you know, from your people and indeed what from the industry. There's a lot to be done. There's a great responsibility there, and it's been an absolute delight now to take the time to talk to you, and thank you for your time in laying out what's going on and indeed the plans ahead. So we wish you all good luck with the projects ahead. To all of your people, stay united, and as you say, stay safe. This is ultimately what it all is about. So Lorenzo Simonelli, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anna, and I look forward to seeing you in person in the not too distant future, I hope.
Indeed we will. When the industry gets back together, I think everybody is looking at that. And of course, in the meantime, the run up to ADIPEC Virtual 2020, we'll all be looking forward to that. But to all of you, our dear audience, too, thank you for tuning in. And we will continue to bring you this series of conversations, the ADIPEC Energy Dialogue. So keep an eye, of course, on the website and stay informed and stay tuned. And we'll continue to bring you more expert analysis and opinion in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you so much.